In 1981, the Space Shuttle Columbia carried an experimental radar instrument into orbit. Its purpose was to test whether imaging radar could map geological structures from space. As the shuttle passed over North Africa, the radar aimed its pulses downward at one of the most barren stretches of land on Earth, the Salima Sand Sheet, a vast expanse of the Sahara in southern Egypt, where nothing grows, nothing lives, and nothing has changed on the surface in recorded memory. When the data came back, the scientists at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory did not believe what they were seeing. Beneath the sand, the radar had revealed the unmistakable signatures of ancient river channels. Wide, branching, sinuous, carved by water that had flowed with enough force and volume to cut deep into the bedrock. Not thin seasonal trickles, but major rivers. Entire drainage systems running for hundreds of kilometers beneath a desert where the annual rainfall today is effectively zero. The researchers called them radar rivers. Their discovery forced a question that is still being answered 4 decades later. If rivers this large once flowed across what is now the driest place on Earth, what else is buried under the Sahara? Who lived along their banks? The Sahara as we know it, an ocean of sand and rock stretching nearly 9.5 million square kilometers across North Africa, has not always been a desert. In fact, for most of the last several 100,000 years, it has cycled between extreme aridity and surprising fertility. The most recent green period, known formally as the African humid period, began roughly 14,600 years ago and lasted until about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. During this window, the Sahara was transformed. Monsoon rains, driven northward by shifts in the Earth's orbital wobble, soaked a landscape that had been parched for millennia. Grasses spread across the dunes. Acacia and hackberry trees grew in the lowlands. Lakes filled and expanded, some of them vast enough to rival the Caspian Sea. Lake Megachad, the largest of these ancient bodies of water, covered an area of over 360,000 square kilometers at its peak, larger than the modern Caspian. Its shoreline deposits are still visible in satellite imagery, etched into the landscape like a bathtub ring left by a receding tide. In Libya, Megalache, Fezzan held enough water to sustain forests along its margins. In Algeria, a chain of lakes known as the Chots Megalaches stretched across the northern edge of what is now open desert. Rivers connected these lakes. The Tamanrasset River, whose buried channel was mapped in detail by a team of European and African scientists using satellite radar in 2015, once drained a basin larger than that of the modern Ganges. Its main channel wound more than 300 miles beneath what is now the Western Sahara before reaching the Atlantic coast of Mauritania, where it carved a massive submarine canyon that still exists on the ocean floor. The canyon had puzzled marine geologists for years. There was no modern river anywhere near it, large enough to have formed it. The radar data finally provided the answer. The river that carved it had been buried under the sand for thousands of years. The evidence of life during the African humid period is everywhere if you know where to look. Across the central Sahara, scattered among the most inhospitable rock formations on Earth, are hundreds of thousands of paintings and engravings carved into stone by the people who once lived here. The Tassili Niger Plateau in southeastern Algeria alone contains an estimated 15,000 individual works of rock art. making it one of the densest concentrations of prehistoric art anywhere in the world. A French archaeologist who documented them in the 1950s called the Sahara the greatest museum of prehistoric art on the planet. The images are staggering in their implications. They depict elephants walking across grasslands, giraffes grazing, herds of long-horned cattle being tended by human figures, hippopotami wallowing in rivers, crocodiles, rhinoceroses, swimmers, people hunting with bows and spears in a landscape that looks nothing like the Sahara of today. The art spans thousands of years and is divided into periods that track the changing environment. The earliest works, dating back as far as 12,000 years, depict large wild animals, the megafauna of a thriving savanna. Later periods show the arrival of domesticated cattle and a shift from hunting to pastoralism. Still later, horses appear, then camels, marking the final desiccation of the landscape and the end of the Green Era. One of the most famous works, known as the Crying Cows, is an engraving found near the Algerian-Libyan border. It depicts a herd of cattle in sweeping, elegant lines, with what appear to be teardrops rolling down their faces. Local Tuareg tradition holds that the image was carved by a herdsman who could no longer find water for his animals. Whether or not the legend is historically accurate, it captures something real. The people and animals of the Sahara lived through one of the most dramatic environmental collapses in human history, and they recorded it on stone. The archaeological record beneath and around the rock art supports the same story. Excavations at Gobero, a site in Niger's Tenere Desert, uncovered two distinct populations of ancient people, separated by 1,000 years. The earlier group, the Kiffian, were tall, powerful hunter-gatherers who fished in lakes that no longer exist. Their harpoon heads have been dated to approximately 7,800 years ago. The later group, the Tenerian, were smaller, more graceful, and herded cattle across a drying landscape. Both left behind burials, pottery, tools, and the bones of the animals they hunted and raised. The site was discovered by the paleontologist Paul Sereno, who had originally come to the region looking for dinosaurs. Instead, he found the remains of two human civilizations that had lived and died in what is now one of the most lifeless places on Earth. And yet, for all the evidence that has accumulated, the Sahara's buried past remains overwhelmingly unexcavated. The radar rivers discovered in 1981 have been confirmed and extended by subsequent missions. The shuttle imaging radar flew again in 1984, and twice more in 1994, each time returning more detailed images of buried channels, lake beds, and geological structures invisible to conventional remote sensing. More recently, civilian satellite radar systems, including RadarSat and the Sentinel missions of the European Space Agency, have added resolution and coverage. The network of ancient waterways mapped so far is immense, but researchers are the first to admit it is incomplete. In many areas, the sand is simply too thick for radar to penetrate. What lies along those buried river channels, in terms of human settlements, remains almost entirely unexplored. The difficulty is not just the sand. The regions where the most significant buried features have been detected are among the most remote and politically unstable places on Earth. Southern Libya, northern Chad, western Sudan, and the deep interior of Algeria are not places where large-scale archaeological excavation is easily organized. Access is limited, security is uncertain, and funding is scarce. The result is one of the great paradoxes of modern archaeology. From space, we can see that a vast network of rivers, lakes, and waterways once covered the Sahara. From rock art and surface archaeology, we know that dense human populations lived along those waterways for thousands of years. We have mapped the channels. We have identified the shorelines. We can estimate the scale of the ecosystems that once existed, but we have barely scratched the surface. The cities, if they existed, the permanent settlements, the trade routes, the networks of human movement that must have connected communities across this enormous landscape, remain buried. No excavation has ever reached them. No radar has resolved them. They are inferred from the evidence around them, from the cattle in the paintings, from the harpoon heads in the sand, from the drainage patterns etched into the bedrock. The Sahara is the largest hot desert on Earth. It is also, almost certainly, the largest unexcavated archaeological site. The rivers that once sustained it are still there, traced in stone beneath the dunes, waiting for the tools and the will to uncover what they carried. 6,000 years ago, the rains stopped. The lakes shrank. The rivers slowed, thinned, and finally went dry. The grasses retreated. The trees died. The animals moved south. The people, the painters, the herders, the hunters, who had lived here for millennia, followed the water to the edges of the desert, to the Nile Valley, to the Niger, to the shores of Lake Chad. Some of them carried with them the skills, the social structures, and the agricultural knowledge that would eventually give rise to the earliest complex civilizations in Africa, including, many scholars argue, the civilization of ancient Egypt itself. Sahara sealed itself behind them. Sand covered the rivers. Dunes buried the lake shores. The paintings remained, high on the plateau walls, too remote and too durable to be erased. But everything else, the homes, the paths, the places where people gathered and traded and buried their dead, sank beneath the surface and disappeared. It took a radar instrument on a space shuttle to prove that the rivers were real. It will take something far more ambitious to find out who lived beside them. Thanks for watching. If this is the kind of exploration you want to follow, subscribe. There is more to come.